I am Ted Meyer, and we are here at High Desert Artist Gallery doing our second interview because we did one the other day in front of a crowd and technology, it didn't work. So we're going to do this again without an audience, but we're hoping it all is great. So tell us who you are.
I'm Karin Skiba.
And you live up here, you live in
Yucca Valley, yes.
All right, so this show is sort of a retrospective for you. You've got a lot going on here. You've got art from 30, 40 years.
I am celebrating 50 years since I showed for the first time in May of 1975. And this work in the exhibition goes back about 25 years because it's only work that's on paper. So I chose pieces that accommodated that situation, and that's what we have.
You were born outside Detroit.
In Detroit, actually, at Holy Cross Hospital, but I lived outside of Detroit.
And then you landed up going to, well, first you went to a girls' high school.
I went to a public high school, but I was coerced into going to an all-girls Catholic college the first year by my father. I wanted to go to art school in downtown Detroit, but he was convinced it was a bad place because someone told him they did drugs. It was 1968.
Everybody was doing drugs.
That's right. But anyway, so I had 1 year at Mary Grove College, and then I decided that I couldn't take it anymore, and I had to get to art school. And so I put all my stuff in a portfolio, and I got on the bus in downtown Detroit and went to the art school and showed them everything, and they said, fine, you're in next year.
Great.
So in the fall of '68, I started there.
That's it. Claremont or Pitzer?
That is at the Center for Creative Studies in Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah, just down the block from the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go through, I have Claremont graduate.
Well, then I left school there. I moved to Canada, and I went to Fanshawe College for a year. I was hoping to be a fashion illustrator, and so that was a lot of the classes that I took in Detroit. And then when I went to Canada, I took a fashion design course. We did a lot of sewing and tailoring and drafted our own patterns and had fashion shows and stuff.
Okay, so let's not get too far ahead here.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about, this is you when you were a kid.
Yes.
How old are you here?
Probably about 5.
And you're drawing. So you the other night you told us a really good drawing about, story about your mom and your crayons and your coloring books. So why don't you?
Okay, well, I call it my chickenpox epiphany because I had chickenpox, and I was in bed, the lights were down, and I was covered in calamine lotion. And one of my aunts brought me a wonderful book that was fairy tales that had a lot of wonderful manila paper and some Hasbro pencils that you could unwind and the lead came out. So I had a great time trying to color in all those pictures and then start to work on the plain paper in the back of the book. And my mother was just horrified that I would hurt this book in any way or form. So she took it away from me. But I knew then that I was compelled to draw. I had to do this. She would sometimes give me paper and I would draw these things. And you know what, Ted? I was always worried because I thought, that house doesn't look real. I'm trying to draw this house. Maybe in my past life I was an artist that could do that. I don't know, but I kept trying, you know. And she'd say, did you go through all that paper already? I'd say, yeah, I need more paper.
That's funny, you know, when I've done work with kids and there's this cutoff, like between 6th and 7th grade, where all of a sudden if it's not realistic, a lot of times they just go, oh, I'm not an artist, and they quit, rather than understanding that could be a style or their outlook. All right, so at this point we have your mom who is sort of telling you you're not an artist, but you've got your dad.
I got my dad. My dad was a photographer. He had gone to school and gotten a certificate in photography, professional photography, and his entire family was an artist of some sort. In fact, I didn't tell you this story. His sister was taking one of those drawing classes where in the back of magazines they used to say, you too can be a commercial artist. And they would send you these big books with all kinds of projects and lessons and drawings in them. Well, I was real fascinated by those books, and she brought one over to my house not knowing that there were nudes in there. And I was in first grade. I was so excited to have this book to try to learn how to do this stuff. And I went to school and told the teacher in the class that I had a book that had naked people in it. So then they called my mother, said, what does Karin have at home? So that book got taken away too. But but they were all artists of some kind, so I know that I definitely got that sort of gene from them. And one morning we were sitting at the kitchen table, and my dad was going through the Detroit news, and there was a beautiful drawing of a woman in a fur stole. And I said, I want to draw like that. And he took a piece of paper and he copied it perfectly. And I thought, oh my God, Dad can really draw, And that really sort of gave me even more permission to carry on with what I wanted.
All right, well, let's get to that work. So the first school you were at, you went to
the Meyer Grove, and then
Meyer Grove, and you got into fashion.
Yeah, I wanted to do it in high school. I was trying to draw that way, but when I went to art school, we had models and things that were these big, tall, wonderful, skinny ladies that we had to imitate, and our deal was to always try to find our own style, and that's what I did. The picture on the right is actually a copy of a drawing, and I had to do some renderings, so you would actually either copy a drawing or copy a photograph. And so I learned how to render. I could do things realistically. It was easy, but it was kind of boring.
And when we walk around later and look at your work, you can talk about some of the work and how this early work sort of is still influencing your later work now.
Yeah, that's a rendering from a photograph.
All right,
so big leap here.
Where are we here college-wise? There's so much back and forth. So you did your fashion at Fosse in London, Ontario.
Fanshawe, yeah.
Fanshawe, okay. And then you went to the Center for Creative Studies in Detroit.
The other way around.
Oh, I have it backward.
Yeah.
All right, but you're doing fiber art there.
Right, well, when I was at the fashion course in Canada, I wandered over into the fine art department, and I saw what they were doing, and I was like, oh my God, they can do whatever they want to do. So I had started working with fabric as a kid. I had a sewing machine when I was 7. And so I was making little purses and things and playing with batik. I had an old farmhouse I was living in Canada, outside of London, Ontario. Right at that point, a lot of women artists were working with fiber again and turning it into fine art or some sort of craft that was, to be exhibited. I didn't know anything about that at the time. I started doing these people and dyeing the fabric, waxing it, dyeing it, and then stuffing the back, doing it with a technique called trapunto. And I had found out about a show that was going up at the local museum in London. It was juried. I had no idea what that meant. And so I put this large piece in the back of my van and went over and dropped it off. It sold before opening night. People started calling me. I got in the show from all 3 jurors. And I started selling stuff. And I thought, wow, okay. And I always knew I was creative, but I had always wanted to do this fashion thing. So I never really trained as a fine artist that much. I had all the basic drawing and design and stuff, figure drawing. So I had a doctor's appointment, and I was talking to the nurse in the doctor's office and told her about what I was doing. And she bought a piece. I went in my car, got one out, and she bought it right away. So when I saw the doctor, I told him, he goes, oh, you're an artist. I thought, yeah, I'm an artist, And then it was like, I started reading all my old art history books again and getting reoriented. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be the best artist I can be.
No, see, that doctor responsible for
I know
giving you a reality check. All right, so what's interesting with these, again, how your earlier work sometimes matches your later work, is the loose. You didn't stick to a square canvas. You've always had irregular shapes, or a lot of the work.
A lot of them, yeah.
Is irregular shapes. So we have your fashion influence that we'll see later, and we have this irregular shape work. So here's a couple more.
TV junkies. I used some acrylic to paint on the fabric too. And this was my sister and I with the rainbow above us. Why, I don't know.
So at this point, did you get any pushback about like women using fabric, it's crafts, it's not fine art?
Not really. It was pretty much accepted. I was having a lot of shows in Canada. I was like a very big toad in a small pond. I was, really excited about it all. I even got a grant. And then my then husband wanted to move to California. And when I got here, I realized that it was a much bigger situation, a much more serious situation. Plus, it was so darn hot that when I would fire up my frying pan and melt my wax, I'd dying, So I thought, okay, this isn't going to work anymore.
So you moved to the high desert.
Yeah, then I move up here. But no, we were living in Pomona, and I met some artists that had studios in Pomona downtown, Dan Van Clapp and Chris Tuvey, and they told me about Claremont. I eventually got a job in Claremont working as a not great secretary, and I got into the New Resources program where you could put all your credits from other colleges together and take certain classes, get your BA, and then I went right into the grad school from there. And I was floundering at that point. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So grad school was the perfect answer for me because it's kind of like 2 years of group therapy, all about art.
So from this work, we move into this work.
That's
what
right.
year? What year?
This was 79, and I had moved to California in 77, so it didn't take long, I guess. But I was doing these sort of flat, wacky things and moving into 1980 and kind of wondering how to proceed. And
so what are we looking at here? Because I'm looking at it. Is it torn paper? Or is it
no,
paint?
no, this is on masonite. It's acrylic on masonite. And I was cutting the masonite like in an arc because I didn't want to keep it square. So you're right about the shapes again.
So this work, there's a series that we're coming up on that looks very much of the time.
Yes.
Pointy,
yeah,
sort of angular, new wave looking.
Yeah.
It could be, on an album cover kind of stuff. This one's a little low res, but this looks very much of
I know it does.
the time.
And it's called You Can Make Art or You Can Make Cookies. I did both.
You did both? All right. And then you met Roland. Your art. Which school are you at
The
this
grad
point?
school.
Which is?
In Claremont.
Claremont, okay.
Yeah. I had begged him to let me come into the system. When I was still at Pitzer, I took classes at the grad school and I met him and Michael Brewster. And so I kind of flowed right in, and he saw me struggling with some of these panels and trying to figure out exactly how I wanted to work it out. And he said, why don't you cut them apart? And I said, oh, with a saw? And he said, yeah, and he gave me a tabletop Dremel. So I took it home. It was kind of like having a little sewing machine because the blade was like a needle, right? And I cut the masonite all apart and I made this big cutout piece. And I brought it back to the school and set it on a pedestal, and he went crazy.
So what he was talking about is cutting out individual elements. It wasn't like he just meant cut it into little squares.
Yeah, and it worked. There was, that time, neo-expressionism was the big, cool word in history, and there was painted sculpture and sculptural painting, so I kind of fell into that. And because the works were oddball shaped, they didn't fit in a frame, and I liked that because they reached out, into the viewer, even more into the space.
What's interesting with this comment, when you told me this story, was sort of his way of going, I'm not sure you're painting, but I like what you're doing, so let's
change it.
Change it enough to make it something more than the painting.
Yeah, I don't consider myself a painter. I'm an artist because I do jewelry, I do sculpture, I've done furniture. I love to paint with watercolors and acrylics, but that's not my total thing. And I know a lot of artists who are painters, period. That's what their focus is, and mine's not.
I just think it says so much about him as a painter, as a teacher.
Yeah.
To not just go, this work is not where it should be. Rather, he actually gave you a direction that worked for you. Like he could see the potential. Because I've had teachers that do both. They're just like,
No, well, you think about his work, and he had his miniatures, and then he started doing abstract painting, and then he moved into his flowers at his later age. And I have a poster from him that he gave me from when he taught up at Boulder, Colorado. And it was a totally different kind of work again, sort of abstracted figures, and there was a horse in it, and it looked like it had watercolor and drawing and everything.
Yeah, like if you see this floral work, especially the ones later even than this,
Yeah.
and compare those with like the room installations, you'd never
I know.
have any idea the same person did it.
And that's why he was sort of a great mentor, because at that time, you were focusing on making a series, and the work was supposed to look alike. And so I had all these pedestal pieces, but then I started building pieces that stood on the floor, and I thought, oh, am I supposed to do that? And it's like, no, you can do whatever you want to do. You give yourself permission. But he was a great person to follow because he did so many different kinds of things too. It's like, okay, he gave me permission. So.
Okay. So after that, you did start cutting things up.
Yeah.
And this one, again, is a little low res. But talk, again, this has those elements of sort of Bauhaus, 70s, New Wave, or 80s,
Yeah.
kind of rock and roll stuff. The pointiness, there's movement in the figures. And this is this an image you would have done flat, but because of Roland, you thought, oh, I'll do it three-dimensional?
No, I was definitely into the 3D stuff. I cut stuff up and I'd find pieces and paint them and put them all together again. And I would sometimes make a sketch, but usually I'd have an idea and I'd sketch it right on the wood. I used birch veneer plywood, and I had a bandsaw and a table saw, so I just would start cutting, once I sketched it on. The stuff was kind of expensive, so I didn't want to mess it up too bad, so I would draw on it first. But, and then you had to prime it and sand it, and then you could paint it and assemble it.
Did you do small sketches and then move them to the birch, or did you actually do your?
I drew on the birch.
Your thinking was on the.
Yeah, and it had to take a certain amount of planning, so you didn't waste materials too much. But at one point in time, several years later, I stopped the planning part. I have ideas, but I just start working with the material, and it kind of flows. All
right, let's go to the next one.
Yeah, I did this kind of work all through the 80s and into the early 90s. And it would change a little bit. Sometimes I'd add what I consider to be more realistic elements. But I showed a lot in LA. I had a dealer in Chicago. I showed in Portland and in Detroit. So, it was really nice. And then the new expressionism kind of changed. People like Jeff Koons, came onto the scene. I tell the story about how I really knew art world had changed when I was teaching an art appreciation class, and I had everybody go down to Mocha because we were at Cal Poly, and I had everyone, kind of going along with learning this new language of art until we walked up to a fish tank on a pedestal with a basketball floating in the water.
I hate that piece.
And they're like, okay, Karin, what's this about? And I thought, oh, geez, So that took some talking, but this kind of thing was not working anymore, you know. And so I kind of went through a time where it was transforming once again. But for a long time, I did this kind of work.
Yeah, I think that basketball is the 80s version of the banana taped to the wall.
Yeah.
So before we move on to more of this work, this is when you start teaching. So you're doing your own work, but you start teaching. So
I started teaching in '82 at Cal Poly, and I taught art appreciation. I think I was telling you how I interviewed for the job, and then everything was going great, and Joe Hannibal said, okay, you're hired, and he pushed a textbook at me. He says, you have 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, that would never happen now.
No, and I had to act fast, So I pulled out all my books and started figuring out the syllabus, and how that worked. And Roland had done a couple lectures in grad school about how to prepare for a class. But a lot of our stuff that we learned at Claremont at that time was more about pulling the art out of yourself, making something nobody'd ever seen before that was a culmination of you. And so, we all knew we wanted to get in a gallery and show and have collectors, but the art was first and foremost. So making a living was like, oh yeah, we got to do that. too. So I just made it work. I would prepare a lecture and then, go home and make the next one. And then I had the whole thing figured out. So it worked really well.
And then you ended up running the gallery there or somewhere
No, I
else?
ran the gallery in the grad school, but then I taught at Cal Poly, Mount Sac, and Golden West. And then in 1990, I got my full-time job at Riverside Community College District. I didn't run the gallery till later, right after I retired. So, but I did curate shows and did a lot of that kind of thing. So,
Which led you to running this place
yeah,
for a couple of years.
yeah.
And you seem to have survived.
Well, it was a juggling act because I had my home life, and then I was teaching like crazy. When I was at Riverside, I became the only full-time person at one of the campuses that they were developing. Norco is now its own college with like 14,000 students, but we only had 7 or 8 full-time faculty there when we started, and I had to teach everything, all the studio classes, plus graphic design, plus computer art, plus figure drawing, plus all the art histories. And there was like 5 of them. So it really made me step up. But then at the same time, I kept my art practice going, and I didn't solicit galleries at that point, but I still kept showing. And I showed like at the Riverside Art Museum and at Laverne University and in a ton of group shows. So I have a really nice resume, but it was a lot of work,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have it. There's so many pages, I had to staple it all together. All right, let's get back to your artwork here.
I was with Traction Gallery in downtown LA for a while, and they sold a little piece of my work to Jodie Foster. Gay Girardi, who just passed away not too long ago, that ran LA Iworks, had brought Jodie in. And when they called and told me, Jodie Foster brought one in, and she was with the LA Iworks, and I was like, eyeglasses, oh my God, So Gay gave me shows and really was wonderful support also. But then I went to the James Turcotte Gallery in Koreatown, and I did a series like this for him.
So how big is this? What are we looking at?
It's about 24 across and maybe 20 tall. It's not real huge. This is a wall installation from my graduate show, and it's pretty big. It's probably a good 8 feet across. It's an exploding kitchen.
I like the toaster with shoes.
Yeah.
So I'm noticing like this figure in this one's pretty similar to.
Yeah, the figures were all like that. There was a gallery downtown on Omar Street. I had a show at Daniel Mars, but then around the corner was Oranges and Sardines. And they had this huge window because they had like an old store that they occupied. And they'd let you do art that would be in that window. So I made a piece called Shopping for a Muse. And I took some of these and I bought big 4x8 sheets of foam core and cut them out and made them stand up like big paper dolls. And they were all characters like that, real 1980s. That was fun.
That's one thing I liked about LA at that time, because you'd have all these stores. There was Cowboys and Poodles. There was the one you just met. There were all these sort of bad combination of words making up things that you would never find, but they were great, especially that Melrose area. There were so many great shops.
Well, Billy had just put in a soap plant there, and it was right across from LA Iworks, so it was really fun. All kinds of stuff.
So here's your furniture, some more 3D.
Some furniture. Sold a lot of those, that type of thing.
So did you do that from scratch, or did you find a chair or a table?
I built it. I did it from scratch.
I would never be able to. It would wobble if I did it. So how about the other piece? Like, what's with
that?
I'm mostly I'm sorry to interrupt, but ask you about the fish. Like the fish seems of a different style than all the other.
I like to throw it in. I did a series of what I called Madonnas, and I don't remember the title, I'm sorry, but this is from 1986, and it has to do with the woods and animals and fishing.
We'll call it Madonna with a fish.
Yeah, okay.
So you're doing all the stuff, and you're getting you've sort of gone from the fiber stuff, and then you went flat. You're 3D. Are you enjoying being a builder too? I mean,
Oh,
most
yes.
people don't think of
I loved it.
female art as building, and so you've gone from fiber to
To work,
construction.
yeah. When I was little, my dad had a workbench in the basement, and I used to try to find nails and then pound them into pieces of junky wood, and I get in trouble for that too. But this sort of, well, my mother, anyway, this kind of satisfied that. I loved wood, I loved cutting it, I loved the smell of it and everything. It's nice.
Do you, so when you finally bought a house up here, do you do a lot of things around the house yourself, or do you?
No.
So do you still have all your
If he
tools?
lets me. Yeah. Well, I donated my bandsaw um, to a friend, but yeah, we have a table saw. I have all my tool stuff. I have a roll cab.
And all your fingers?
Yes,
All your fingers. All right.
I'm very protective of those.
So later on,
Okay, so we go through the 90s, and there's a lot of different kinds of work that went on. And I had some turmoil because I was having a divorce in the 90s. And what was kind of nice is I had a house to myself finally, and I could work all throughout the whole house. The whole thing was a studio. I went on sabbatical, and I had to have a sabbatical show. So I came up with a series of work. A couple of the pieces in this show are from that series, and this was one of the pieces also. At that time in the 90s, the college sent me to Florence, Italy to teach for three different years. So I had an
it's a
apartment
rough
there.
job.
I know. So I had an apartment in Florence, right by Santa Croce. One was right down by the market. And I was there for an entire semester. It was great. And I was totally in love with Venice, because I used to go to Venice all the time and taking pictures of the alleyways and stuff, the doorways, everything. Just, I'm half Italian. I was the first grandchild to go back to the old country. I cried on the plane. I was so happy. So I loved it there, and it really influenced what I did. Some of my work that's more contemporary or current has jesters and jokers, and that was a real direct influence of seeing all the masks and the puppets and stuff that were in Venice and of course all through Florence.
So this piece
This piece
is collage, right? It's
yeah,
painted photo with collage.
and it's on panel. It's called non affectante, and
So you took the photo?
no, I borrowed it and added to it. I loved her face, so I used her a lot. Now I use all my own photos, but this was from an Italian Vogue magazine.
Okay.
And then this one is another piece from that series. Again, a doorway in Venice, and then things put together with that. A year before that, I had a show at Laverne University, a solo show, and it also had some influence from Italy. And this was kind of breaking away from total cutouts and then really getting into more of the normal rectangular sort of format. And then I started putting words in some of the stuff.
We still designed the frame.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nothing's totally rectangular. And
Okay.
this is when you met
Robert. Yeah. This
your
was
husband.
a couple years later.
Okay.
And
So what I'm just going to point out here, like you meet this guy, your color palette changes, your imagery changes. Like these are really happy and light. And is that a response to him or just
to life in general, yeah, with
Okay.
him, yeah. We decided I wanted to put music to my pieces, and I was introduced to him. I finagled that one, but we had a mutual friend, and I knew that she had this guy she played music with. And so when I visited her, I saw the poster or the card called Latin Lizards. And I looked at that and I said, "Who's that?" And she said, "Well, that's Bob." I said, "Well, Bob needs to meet me." And she gave me a whole bunch of excuses of why that wouldn't happen. He had a girlfriend at the time. I didn't mention this the first interview. That was in Hawaii. And I said, "Well, Hawaii's a long ways away."
Mm-hmm.
So I finally finagled the phone number and got in touch with him. And after a couple false starts, we met. And when he looked at my work and I told him what I wanted to do, he said, "Well, you should do some spoken word and we could do a performance." And I thought, perform? You know? So we worked on it, and we wrote 6 songs. We formed a little band because he plays keyboards and knows music, real well. And we did some spoken word, and then we were talking about this song we wrote called Cactus Love. And he was driving me crazy because he wasn't playing the music I thought he should play. So I started to sing it. And he was like, "Oh my God, you can sing." And I thought, uh-oh. So then I started singing some of the stuff, and he got me to perform. And we did performances at a gallery in Pomona, at my college, at Chafee. It took us a year and a half, but we got it all done.
Driving on the freeway, gray sky, always sunny, mountains disappearing behind a mask of smog. Thinking of you, the cactus landscape, how it can trap me, make me bleed like a strike on a thorn, this cactus of love. Cactus love, kiss me, hold me, hurt sting like a bark caught in my...
So why don't we walk around the gallery,
Okay.
and you can talk about some of the pieces that are here.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. Tell us about this piece.
Well, this was in 2013, 14, and I had been doing work from the early 2000s forward, but because I was so involved with the academic world, the sort of the string of art jumped around a lot. But I had a chance to have a show at Cal Poly, and I went back to Detroit and took photographs of all kinds of architecture. A lot of churches that were closed down, a lot of old buildings, some beautiful new buildings. And when I came back, I made all of these pieces on paper with collages of my photos printed plus watercolor. This is called Holy Cross because it is in the shape of a cross. And I started doing these trees more that were sort of, I'm gonna move to this one, kind of like going back to my roots, but then expanding forward into my future. This is another one that has different buildings from Detroit. I love the architecture there. It's great, even the stuff that's, kind of falling down, because a lot of it's not. So these pieces were really important to me and caused me to work larger on bigger format. This is one that has a lot of different things in it. The school itself that I went to in Detroit had been an offshoot of the arts and crafts era, and they had started this society of arts and crafts in Detroit in the 1920s. So they called the school at first the Art School of Arts and Crafts. And I always thought that Art Nouveau had a certain Asian feel to it. So I just called this the Arts and Crafts Geisha. And I don't know, it was just really fun to do it. It was kind of the same kind of feel of my background and using some of the things that I had done before.
So you mentioned you really like architecture. You built these things, and then
These things, yeah.
what are they? Are they houses? Are they?
They're shrines. They're shrines. I had done other houses and big tall things on stilts like this before, but I found some old slides. When I taught at Cal Poly, I pulled slides in the slide library, and these pink ones were because they were so old, but they were all early American people. And I did some research to find out who these women were, and they are from like the daughters of governors or the wives of someone important. And I decided to do a shrine to them. And I used flowers because it's like a bouquet to them, and I had flowers in the Detroit work too. So it's called Homage to Duty and Dignity, Wives of Early American Men. And this one is for some old, broken, wonderful toys that I still collect. And it's a shrine to rescued toys and remnants of past love. And it was fun because I could do whatever I wanted to do, and I could build again, At the same time, COVID was going on, and this quilt back here,
Walk over here.
yeah, my mom had passed away, and I was a recipient of all the flowers that everybody sent. So I photographed them and decided to make an unorthodox quilt because I don't sew in a real orthodox way. And I put them all together with paper. I had the prints done on canvas so I could sew them. When we had the opening of this show, so many women went crazy over this. It really astounded me. I have never shown it before. It's just been in the studio.
Back to crafts.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a crossover, you know.
These pieces take, to me, from your fashion illustration, because the figures are elongated, and as we know, fashion illustration is like 10 to 1 as opposed to 8 to 1, and you've got the clothing, and it has this sort of looseness like your fashion illustration.
That's true. Yeah.
And the way you do the thing. I mean, that's a very fashion illustration. But you've done all your other stuff in it. You've done your collage, you're adding things, you've got photos. So this sort of brings together a lot of what you did early on in your life.
These are from 2018-19. This one and the other small one, when my mom passed away, Robert was still working full-time and I had retired. After I retired, I started the gallery at the college, but then I finally left in 2015. So I would come up to the studio and just flip through a Vogue magazine or something and draw the faces, but then distort them and have fun with that. When I was taking fashion courses at school, I used to draw from Vogue all the time. So it was kind of like going back to something comfortable because I was grieving. And a couple times I did the faces and they really, I thought, oh my God. So I got mad and I cut them in half and I thought, oh, I like how this works. So I started making a whole, I have like, I don't know, 9 or 10 of these. And I really, really liked them. I didn't know how they'd be perceived, but I put together, like some of it's got crocheting that I did. There's a bunch of old stuff sort of packed behind it. And I really enjoyed doing them. But when I did the art cards, I had been using this format for little assemblages, but I thought, I'm gonna put some faces on there. And then I got into it. And I went back and I looked through all my digital files. And I found all these faces. Some of them I painted over. So these are actually actualizing them, let's say. And I got like 50 done. And I thought, well, I think there's more. There's 100. So they're all different faces that I've done. And when I did this, just lately, I thought, oh my God, I've gone right back to fashion again. And I never realized it. It became very physically apparent.
And that leads us over here, where these look like your time in Italy.
They do. Well, I had done weaving with paper and photographs, okay? And then I started just weaving the paper and putting things on top. And some of them, this one is a photograph that I painted over. This is from another painting that I repainted. And it just was really freeing. I want to do bigger ones that are even more loose. This is the newest one, and I like the fact that it's not confined.
So this again, I'm just always surprised how everything sort of circles around with you. You've got your irregular shape, you've got your fashion stuff, you've got your collage, you've got your time in Italy. I mean, everything that you do sort of shows up in here.
Yeah, it was very satisfying to hang this because I could see that there was a stream. And you know, when you're working by yourself and you have stuff in storage, you don't know. You know, you think, well, is this just sort of weird, random things I'm doing? But then when you get to exhibit it all, you can see that it all ties together.
Well, it was great to see your show, and thank you for talking to us and giving us the tour around the gallery.
Thank you. Thank you for involving me. Thank you.
Then what's your next project?
Archiving. I've been cleaning out the studio and getting ready to store things, and then I'm going to work on some larger pieces.
Do you have
I'm
big
excited.
flat files, or how are you? I mean, this is a pretty big piece.
No, they're on a big table, and they're all piled up real carefully. So.
Not archival.
It'd take a big flat file, wouldn't it?
Yeah. What's your website if people want to find you?
Just KarinSkiba.com.
All right. Thank you for watching. And if we were here in front of the audience the way we were before, there would be big applause right now. So we have no big applause, but thanks for watching.
Driving on the freeway, gray sky, always sunny, mountains disappearing behind a mask of smog. Thinking of you, the cactus landscape, how it can trap me, make me bleed like a love.